Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Marvel and DC Retrospective channel. This week was originally supposed to be Identity Crisis, the DC event from 2004, but unfortunately, some unforeseen circumstances happened. I dropped and broke my phone, and so my phone is currently being repaired, and it might take 3 weeks to repair it. So it's going to be a while before we get to Identity Crisis, especially because the entire recording was on that phone. So until then, I'm just going to be doing. I still wanted to release videos each Sunday, so I thought I'd do something else to fill in the time until we get to Identity Crisis. So I thought this week I would cover Volume 2 of Moon Knight, because I did Volume 1 a while ago, and I was always planning on doing Volume 2. In fact, I was originally planning on doing Volume 2 after I'd done Identity Crisis and finished off The Flash before Infinite Crisis. I was going to take a bit of a break, do Moon Knight, and then do Infinite Crisis. But I guess we're doing Moon Knight right now because, circumstances have changed, things are different, and I want to be making sure that I'm continuing to get content out. This week we're going to be doing Moon Knight Volume 2, which is just 6 issues, because I guess the first volume got cancelled, and then a couple of years later, Marvel were like, hey, let's try and sell Moon Knight again. And at the end of the last volume, it actually ended with Mark Spector gives up being Moon Knight, and he also gives up all of his identities. So he is just Mark Spector now. Like, he's no longer got his taxi driver or rich man persona. He's just Mark Spector. He's dating Marlene. Marlene is really happy that he doesn't have alternate identities anymore. They're not classified as alternate personalities yet. We haven't gotten to that retcon. They're just secret identities. But this miniseries, this 6-issue series, really, I think, is the beginning of what Moon Knight would eventually become. It deals a lot more with the religious side of Moon Knight and Khonshu, because in Volume 1, Khonshu was, it was always speculated whether or not Khonshu was actually real or not, or it was actually the spirit of Khonshu that was communicating with Mark. Mark would choose to believe that it was just a statue. It was always this thing of, is it just a statue? Is it a magic statue? We don't know. And the conclusion in the original volume was that it is just a regular statue. But then this series changes that and reveals that it is not, in fact, a regular statue, and that it is actually the real god Khonshu communicating to Mark. So, yeah, let's just get straight into Volume 2, shall we? So it's written by Alan Zelenetz, with art by Chris Warner and E.R. Cruz. The beginning of the issue just goes over Mark's origins, where he was working for a villain known as Bushwhacker, and I think that's his name, right? And he ended up turning against him because Bushwhacker was after this gold, and he was going to kill Marlene's father, and so Mark turned against him and eventually got dumped in the middle of the desert by Bushwhacker. And while crawling through the desert, he came across the tomb of Khonshu, and he was dragged into the tomb by a bunch of dudes who tried to sacrifice him, and the statue of Khonshu shone its light on Mark, and he suddenly became Moon Knight. His mind was messed with, and he became Moon Knight. He thought he was Moon Knight, and that's when he became a vigilante to start fighting criminals and stuff. Eventually, he met his own father, and his father, who was a rabbi, was killed, and it was upon the death of his father that he decided that he wasn't going to be Moon Knight anymore and give up the life. And also Marlene was kind of like, if you don't stop being Moon Knight, then we're not going to be dating anymore. We can't date anymore. And so, yeah, Mark gave up being Moon Knight, And so this issue begins properly, like where the actual story begins, is Mark is no longer Moon Knight, and he has opened up his own museum called the Spectre Museum, where he sells all sorts of antiques and things, including the statue of Khonshu. And there's actually a bidding going on for the statue. So Mark is there in order to make sure it all goes well. There's this guy named Munjur Gaudi. He's at the museum because he wants to buy the statue of Khonshu, and he runs into this guy whose name is Khalid, and Khalid has a staff with an Anubis head on it, and he points it at Gaudi, and he shoots out a gas which instantly kills Gaudi, because Khalid is working for a mysterious master who wants the Khonshu statue for himself. And so Khalid's master, who we will eventually learn goes by the alias of Anubis, buys the statue of Khonshu, and Mark makes a point that, like, the statue was bought by a Middle Eastern man whose name they didn't know. Like, whoever bought the statue, they didn't know his name. They just knew he was Middle Eastern, and that's very suspicious, to be buying something and not disclose your actual name. So Mark has Frenchie looking in on it while Mark gets to live a normal life with Marlene. So Frenchie is off investigating this Anubis guy. He would eventually come back to Mark and explain to him that he is a mysterious guy. He doesn't know his name, right? Nobody knows who he is, but he is this guy who lives in Egypt and has a empire of men, and he bought the Spectre statue, like the statue of Khonshu, for unknown reasons, and that Mark might have to go to Egypt if he wants to retrieve the statue or figure out what this guy wants with it. But Mark doesn't want to give up his personal life, his regular life with Marlene, so he sleeps on it, and eventually Khonshu appears to him, the spirit of Khonshu. This is the first time that Khonshu ever directly communicates with Mark as a spirit. So he appears to Mark, and then Mark starts hearing voices in his head telling him to go to Egypt, and he can't fight the voices anymore. He wants to go to Egypt because he thinks that if he goes, then the voices might stop. And Marlene is like, if you go back into this life, if you get back into the life of Moon Knight, like, we're over, because I don't want to deal with somebody who has, a multiple personality disorder, because Marlene, at least at this point in time, is very ableist. She definitely, she consistently called Mark crazy in the previous volume just because he might have multiple personalities. She's just not a very supportive person. Because immediately, as soon as he's like, I gotta go to Egypt because I'm hearing voices in my head about, Khonshu telling me to go to Egypt, she's like, well, leave me out of it. I want nothing to do with you. And he's like, oh yeah, of course, you're always making the immature decision to run away, and just because you're not getting your way. And Marlene starts crying as she runs away, and it's hard to feel bad for her because she's not really the greatest person. Neither of them are, Mark and Marlene have always been very toxic for one another. It's one of those relationships where you don't feel bad for either of them. So yeah, we finally get to see this guy Anubis. We get to see where he lives. He lives in Egypt, and he has a royal pyramid that he lives in with a hallway. Oh, it's not a pyramid. What am I talking about? It's just a palace. It's a palace that he lives in. I got confused because eventually Anubis would be revealed to be the brother of a pharaoh, and that's why I was getting mixed up with the fact that he lives in a pyramid. He doesn't live in a pyramid. He lives in a palace, a royal palace that he built with wealth, that he got and we'll explain it later. Because he does a massive dump of his backstory to Mark when they eventually cross paths. So he believes himself to be Anubis reincarnated in the same way that Mark is supposed to be like a reincarnated form of Khonshu. So he wears like an Anubis helmet and gear designed by Anubis, and he took the statue of Khonshu because he wants Mark to come to him so that he can kill Mark and destroy Khonshu forever so that he can be the supreme god. That he, Anubis, can be better than Khonshu as long as Khonshu doesn't exist anymore and is gone. So before Mark can head off to Egypt, he actually bumps into that Khalid guy from earlier, and Khalid tries to kill Mark because he was sent by Anubis to kill Mark. And Mark deduces that the staff that he has isn't a regular staff, and so he hits the staff out of his hand just as the staff starts like shooting out its like killing gas. And he tries to grab Khalid, and Khalid just throws Mark over his shoulder easily, and then just runs and commits suicide. He just jumps straight out of the window to his death. He's like, "Death to Khonshu." So Mark checks out the staff, and he realizes that it was, it had like some kind of toxin in it that kills you instantly, and he comes to the conclusion that Gaudi, who died at the museum, didn't die of a heart attack. He died because of this gas. He then jumps on a plane and heads over to Egypt, where the voices start leading him to a mysterious tomb. And he enters the tomb and finds a door with an Ankh on it, like an Ankh symbol. And he opens the door to find 3 priests who reveal to Mark that Khonshu is indeed a real god who really did come to him and talk to him, and that they want him to become Moon Knight again because it's his destiny to be Moon Knight, and that, it won't end until he does what Khonshu wants, and so the only way that Mark is ever going to be free of Khonshu is if he just continues to do what Khonshu wants him to, and then maybe one day Khonshu will set him free and allow him to live a normal life. But we don't know how long that's going to be. And so Mark is like, well, since I don't really have a choice, I guess I'll become Moon Knight again. And they're like, all right, go over to that chest over there. We have a nice costume in there for you. We got some great weapons in there for you. And this is where Moon Knight has a lot more religious symbolism to him, especially like Egyptian religion, like symbolism. Because Moon Knight not only now has an Ankh on his costume design, but also he has a lot of Egyptian like type weapons. He has an Ankh, which will apparently light up when it's around evil. He also has an ivory boomerang that's engraven with protective charms, wristbands, scarab darts, and throwing irons, a lasso, grapple, and bowler. And so, yeah, he has everything he needs to become Moon Knight. He dresses up. He shows off his new costume. He's supposed to have white gloves on, but occasionally he's drawn without white gloves, which I think is just the error. He takes off the costume because obviously he doesn't want anyone to know that he's Moon Knight. He gets into his Jeep to drive off, and as he's driving away, some of Anubis's men try to kill him. They're like riding on camels with spears. They start throwing spears at his Jeep. And so Mark swerves the Jeep and crashes it and then attacks the men. He pulls out his bowlers and he throws them at these guys. And then one of them jumps off of his camel and tries to stab Mark with a couple of daggers, but Mark fights him back. He manages to get the daggers out of this guy's hands, but the guy bites down on a cyanide pill, committing suicide. And the other guy, Mark goes to check the other assassin, and the other assassin also killed himself. That's when Frenchie calls Mark on the phone and explains to him who this Anubis guy is. While he's talking to Mark, he's actually having he's in bed with a woman because Frenchie is supposed to be kind of like a ladies' man. He's Mark's right-hand man. They've been fighting each other since they were both mercenaries, so they're like best friends. So Mark eventually finds Anubis's palace, where he sneaks in under the guise of Moon Knight, but a bunch of Anubis's men catch him, and he's like, whoa, there's too many men for me to fight alone, so I better get out of here. And he quickly runs off and finds a boat, tries to get back to his boat, and his boat just gets blown up by Anubis's men, so he has no choice but to fight them. One of these guys that works for Anubis has a pet eagle or a pet hawk. He sends it at Moon Knight, and Moon Knight throws the boomerang at it, killing it. He just does a shot of him just throwing a boomerang at a hawk, killing it. The Ark starts lighting up because it lights up whenever there's evil. Like, the priests weren't kidding around. It really does that. And so he starts using the Ark to, like, beat them across the head. He's just like, ugh, and, like, knocking these guys across the head with this Ark. One of these guys grabs, puts a rope around Mark's neck and starts strangling him. And more guys start, like, putting ropes around his neck, and they all pull him to the ground. And that's when, like, Mark passes out. And when he wakes up, he finds Anubis standing over him, holding his Ark, because he's taken all of Mark's weapons. And Mark finds himself bandaged up like a mummy on, like, a special, like, sacrificial table. And that's when Anubis reveals who he is. His name is Aramzes. He is the brother to the pharaoh Seti. And this is the tomb, like, this is Seti's tomb that they are currently in. And after his brother died, he tried to become the new pharaoh through bloodshed, but eventually he was captured and entombed in the tomb for thousands of years. And on the night that Mark Spector was brought to the tomb, and he became Moon Knight, the statue of Khonshu also shone its light upon Aramzes, and he became Anubis, which is why he's still alive. And using the wealth within the tomb, like all the treasures and stuff, he was able to gain a vast wealth. He would eventually find oil and stuff, which made him even richer. So he was able to create his royal palace, and his, like, Anubis mask, which can shoot out lasers, by the way. It's got, like, technology in it that lets him have heat vision. But he always knew that as long as the spirit of Khonshu, like, whoever the vessel of Khonshu was still alive, he would never be able to, like, rule in peace as long as Moon Knight was alive. So he spent a long time searching for the statue of Khonshu, because he knew that was his clue to whoever Moon Knight was. So he knew if he took the statue, it would draw that person to him. And he almost gave up looking for the statue, but then he found it at the museum, and he got it from the museum, and he brought it here, and now he has Mark, and he's planning on sacrificing Mark and killing him, so that he can be the strongest god. But the priests did say to Mark earlier, and so did Khonshu, that Moon Knight is stronger under the moon, and they were talking literally, because the moon rises, and Mark gains super strength from the moon, and he's able to rip out of his bandages, and then he fights off Anubis's men. He punches straight through one of their shields. Like, that's how strong Moon Knight is when the moon comes out. Which I don't know how I feel about Moon Knight having superpowers. I'd much prefer him being a moon-themed vigilante who has the same strength as a regular guy. Like, that's how he was in the first volume. It made him a lot more down to earth, a lot less, like, overpowered, especially because most of the time he's just fighting regular criminals. So yeah, he beats up all of Anubis's men, and the sandstorms begin sweeping through the tomb as Moon Knight and Anubis face off in their final battle, where Moon Knight declares that he's going to defeat Anubis and make him pay for everything he's done. So they have a massive fight where Anubis eventually manages to get Moon Knight on the ground, and he starts strangling Moon Knight. But Moon Knight sees his Ankh nearby. He reaches over, he grabs it, and the light of the Ark blinds Anubis long enough that Moon Knight can smack him over the head. And upon smacking him over the head, he actually causes Anubis's helmet to fritz out, and so he throws his helmet off, and the sands from the sandstorm get in his eyes, and a nearby pillar starts breaking, and it falls over, and before Anubis can do anything, it falls on top of him, supposedly killing him. And the storms rage over the entire palace, destroying everything. However, Mark miraculously survives somehow, and he assumes that it's the fact that Moon Knight, or Khonshu, I should say, protected him from the sandstorms. And so while Mark is eager to go back into being Moon Knight, he's like, I don't really want to give up my personal life. I am indebted to you because you saved my life. And so that's where the issue ends. It ends with Mark Spector deciding to go back down the pathway of becoming Moon Knight because he feels indebted to Khonshu after Khonshu saved his life. And for a first issue to this volume, there's a lot of lore drops for Moon Knight, and especially this Anubis guy that was introduced in this issue, like having to go through his entire backstory and stuff. I do appreciate that the first couple of issues do go over Moon Knight's origin, so we can just get that out of the way. But yeah, I didn't think this was bad. I don't think it's as good as any of the stuff that came before it in the first volume, the stuff that was written by Doug Moench. But like, not bad. I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of these issues go. Yeah. All right, so issue 2. The issue begins in northern Yakutan, where a bunch of men who work for a mysterious guy bring this guy's next experiment. I'm not going to say who this guy's name is because it's not revealed to us yet, but they bring this guy a hostage who he's going to experiment on and inject with electrodes. This mysterious man has is paralyzed in half of his face, and so he's experimenting on people in order to try and cure his affliction. Meanwhile, Mark heads back home, where he finds that Marlene was true to her word and really did leave when she said that she would leave if he became Moon Knight again. He sees a woman struggling with like her boyfriend. He's like trying to he's harassing her, and Mark's just like, hey, you should get your hands off that woman. And he's like, hey, you're talking to me? I'll beat the crap out of you. And he goes to punch Mark, and Mark dodges out of the way. And then he just shoves this guy. And because the moon is up, Mark forgets that he has super strength. And so this guy goes flying through the window into the ocean. Mark looks out the window. He realizes that the guy also can't swim. So he quickly jumps into the water to save him. And he's like, man, I forgot I have superpowers now. I'm going to have to go to the gym and figure out my strength so that I can, hold back whenever I'm just out in public, because I don't want people to find out that I have superpowers. So he grabs the guy, he brings him up to safety, and that's where he sees Marlene, and Marlene sees Mark and is just like, oh crap, it's Mark. I can't talk to him right now. And she just leaves, she runs away, and Mark chases after her. She gets into a taxi, and Mark, hails another car in order to go after her. Or no, he doesn't hail another car. He gets in his own car, sorry. He gets in his own car and starts chasing after Marlene like a psychopath. And that's when the priests do the right thing and stop him and are like, hey, Mark, I know you want to stalk your ex-girlfriend, but you got to go help some people. And they show Mark a vision of this mysterious guy from earlier, the people he's experimenting on, and a mysterious woman who wears glasses. And so Mark heads to Yucatan, where he sees the woman that he's supposed to be looking for, and so he decides to quickly sneak off and get into his Moon Knight gear so he can have a chat with her. But that's when some of this dude, this doctor, some of his men come to grab her and take her to him. And Mark hears the gunfire and he's like, oh, that means something bad's happening. So he quickly puts on his Moon Knight costume and finds the guys loading her into their van. So he chases after the van. He grabs onto it because he's super fast. Like, runs up to the van, climbs on top of it, and beats the driver in the face, causing him to fall out of the van. And then he attacks the other guy with his bowler, knocking him out of the van too. And then he has to quickly gain control of the van so that it doesn't crash. She's like, oh, quick, drive, like, let me drive. And Moon Knight's like, nah, I can handle it. And he swerves the car and crashes it next to a tree. And that's when she introduces herself to him. It turns out her name is Victoria Grail. And she was hired by this man whose name is Arthur Harrow. And you might recognize that name from the Moon Knight show. He's in that show, played by Ethan Hawke, though as far as I can tell, he's a very different character in that. In this, Arthur Harrow is a horrible man who loves Adolf Hitler, and he loves the Auschwitz experiments, and he wants to do the same thing. Basically, he's experimenting on people, trying to, and injecting them with electrons to try and make them unable to feel pain. And then he wants to turn that into a chemical solution so that he can cure himself of his paralysis and no longer feel pain. And so Victoria's goal is to stop him because her grandparents went through Auschwitz, or her father went through Auschwitz. It might be her father, because this is this is in the 80s, so it was back when, like, you know, it could have been her father, possibly. But yeah, her father went through that stuff, and she's like, I don't want anyone else going through that shit, so we're gonna stop Arthur Harrow from doing this to anybody else. You know, and Moon Knight's like, just let me handle it. And she's like, no, I'm coming with you. I'm doing this. And that's when we get to see Arthur Harrow experimenting on people, injecting them with electrons, causing them to feel immense pain, and then injecting them again, and eventually they just don't feel anything at all. Like, it works. They no longer feel pain. And he's like, yes. So now I've got to cut him open and, you know, get his blood so I can figure out the solution, figure out how to create a chemical solution out of this. And that's when he gets contacted by this group that he works for called Omnium. They are basically ordering Arthur to do all these experiments. And Arthur's plan is that once he successfully creates this solution, he's going to turn against Omnium or separate from them and use his solution to gain a Nobel Prize in medical science, because that's his main goal. In fact, he's already gotten one, but he wants to get another one. Meanwhile, Marlene is living the single life. It's this part where we get to see her kind of just being like, I need to start hanging out with people, or like I'm trying to, you know, escape the idea of being a mature adult. So maybe I should start actually talking to mature people instead of trying to run away from being mature and, you know, acting like a child. I don't know. I have no interest in whatever Marlene's up to, because I mean, they could make it interesting, but they don't. They decide that it's just going to be a bit of a fan servicey moment where she's wearing like skin tight suit, doing gym stuff. Like, a lot of stuff with Marlene in these series tends to be very much just fan service, making her into a sexual object more than an actual character. Moon Knight and Victoria find Arthur Harrow's place where his lab is supposed to be. Moon Knight bends open the bars, kicks down the door, and they see a lab that they're just like, there's no way Arthur Harrow could be experimenting in here. This lab sucks. You see a nearby jaguar, like there's a jaguar in a cage nearby, and Arthur Harrow is like, I can't let them find me. And so he lets the jaguar out of the cage, and it attacks Moon Knight. But he fights against it with his super strength. He just kicks he kicks the jaguar and sends it flying, and it just goes boom, like in a nearby wall. Doesn't die. Moon Knight ties it up. He just knocked it out. So Moon Knight figures out that there is a hollow wall by knocking his Ankh against it. So he he just picks up a nearby desk and throws it at the wall, creating a hole in it. It's like, walk or take the elevator. And so they enter this secret underground lab where they find the actual lab where Arthur is doing his experiments. They find all the people that he's been experimenting on, the people that can't feel pain. And Arthur is like, oh, look, like you came. Too bad, I'm out of here. See ya. And he like shuts the door and he's like, I've programmed all of these guys to try and kill you. And so all of the people that Harrow has experimented on, they all try to fight Moon Knight. And because Moon Knight's so strong, he accidentally breaks a guy's arm because the guy grabs him by the neck and he gets his hand, like he gets out of this guy's grip, but he breaks the guy's arm. And because the guy can't feel any pain, he doesn't know that his arm is broken. And he's like, if I keep fighting these guys like this, I'm going to accidentally kill them. Like, we got to get out of here and go after Harrow. So they go up to the door that Harrow escaped through, but it's locked. So what Moon Knight does is he rips the door off. He almost rips his own arms off doing so, but he manages to pull the entire door off. And they quickly run through, and Harrow, signals for his escape helicopter, and they manage to just escape from Harrow's experiments in time, but they don't get to Harrow fast enough because the helicopter arrives, he jumps onto a ladder, and it starts carrying him away. And before Moon Knight can get up to him, the helicopter drops a grenade, and so Moon Knight is like, oh crap, and he grabs Victoria, pulls her out of the way as the explosion happens, and Harrow gets away, and Moon Knight and Victoria actually have a kiss. And I don't think Victoria knows who Moon Knight is either. He's been Moon Knight this entire time, so I don't think she knows he's Mark. But yeah, they kiss one another, and Moon Knight is like, I'm sorry, Marlene. It's like, why are you apologizing to Marlene, Mark? She decided to leave you. I think it's fully fine. Like, you're not dating her anymore. This isn't cheating. You're fully fine to move on to a different relationship if you want to. Victoria seems like a much better person anyway. She's much nicer than Marlene. And Harrow goes and visits Omnium, where they decide to send him to a new location where his new lab is going to be. And Moon Knight is like, we're going to probably cross paths with Harrow again in the future. And when we do, this time, we'll take him down once and for all. And so that's where the issue ends. It ends with like a little cliffhanger of Harrow's probably going to come back. Alright, so issue 3 of Moon Knight Volume 2 reintroduces a villain known as Morpheus, who is this guy he's a regular dude who could never dream, and he like experimented on him. He got like experimented on, so that he could finally dream again. But the experiments caused him to turn into a monster whenever he dreams. And as this monster, he has the ability to manifest dark energy out of his dreams and also take control of people's minds and then give them the ability to alter, people and give them hallucinative dreams as well. And he's obsessed with, like, he thinks of himself as a god, and his goal is to basically find someone who will become, like, his sacrifice or become his, like, wife, I guess, or the closest thing that he has to a relationship, which in this story just happens to be Marlene, who is visiting the hospital that Morpheus is at. The connection that Marlene has with Morpheus is that in the previous volume, Morpheus took control of her brother Peter, which eventually led to Peter's death. If you want to check it out, then you can watch the previous Moon Knight videos that I did where Morpheus shows up a couple of times. I think it's in one of the final videos that you get to see the stuff with Marlene's brother Peter. And if you're enjoying this video so far, then please feel free to subscribe, and you'll be able to see you'll see more videos that'll be coming out in the future. So yeah, Morpheus starts attacking the police as they infiltrate the hospital, looking for what's going on, because they heard that, like, you know, one of the patients got out and they started causing chaos, and they get there and they find Morpheus, and Morpheus shoots them with his dark dream energy. And then he finds a bunch of the patients that are currently in the hospital. They're all mental patients. And he makes them his, like, heralds, I guess you could call them. Using his abilities, he gives them the power over others' dreams. And yeah, they become like his servants. Meanwhile, Mark is bike riding because the priests haven't called for him to be Moon Knight in a while, so he gets to just live his ordinary life as Mark Spector. I think this is the biggest issue that I have with this volume so far, is that the interesting parts about Moon Knight are now gone. Like, the interesting part about Moon Knight was the multiple identities, but now they no longer exist. It's just Mark, and he's just a multi-billionaire. So now he is exactly like Batman. You know, while he before had quite a few differences from Batman, mainly the identity thing, now he is pretty much just Batman, but like religious, you know? Batman if he was based on a god. Oh wait, that is a thing. Barbados. Um so Mark gets a call from Marlene, who tells him to come to the hospital because Morpheus is back. And Mark is like, "Who's Morpheus?" And Marlene is like, "Didn't you read that issue of Moon Knight?" I'm just kidding. He remembers who he remembers who Morpheus is. He quickly heads to the hospital. Meanwhile, Morpheus gives his servants the abilities to control dreams, and they specifically pick certain things that they base their powers off of. So one of them, her dream is to just be a really rich woman, so that kind of goes into her powers. She has like a scarf that can stretch and wrap around people. One of the guys just dreams that he is really strong, so he has the ability to make people think he's giant and really strong. He isn't actually, like, none of them actually have these powers. They just have the ability to make people think that they do. So this guy, like, one of the guys has the ability to make people think that he's an army general with, like, armies of tanks and stuff. And then there's this one woman who has the ability to make people think that she's a weird flesh creature. It's really hard to explain. But Marlene tries to get the jump on Morpheus by hitting him over the head, and she actually gains control of Marlene and plans to sacrifice her or make her his, like, his beloved, his betrothed. He's going to bring her to the top of the building, like to the top of the hospital, to make her his betrothed using his dream energy to do so. I don't know how he's going to do it, but it involves just lifting her in the air with his dream energy, and that's going to somehow make her his betrothed or something. I guess he's going to give her the dream powers so that she can become his, like, partner in dream crime. Moon Knight arrives. He meets up with Detective Flint, who is a detective from the previous Moon Knight volume, where he would work with Moon Knight and tell him about, you know, investigations and stuff. At first, he and Moon Knight were against each other because Flint wasn't a fan of Moon Knight, because Moon Knight was a vigilante, but eventually they became allies. Moon Knight quickly enters into the hospital. He actually repels his way up the building, where he comes in conflict with one of Morpheus's servants, and all of a sudden Moon Knight finds himself in the middle of a war where the servant is a general and there's a bunch of tanks and army men, but Moon Knight very quickly figures out that it's not actually real and that it's just a dream. And he eventually ends up in another dream against another one of the servants, which is the rich lady. She wraps her scarf around Moon Knight's face and then attacks him with a hammer, knocking him to the ground. And then he ends up in the dream of one of the other servants who turns into a massive, strong, buff guy, and he grabs Moon Knight and starts crushing him. Because even though he's in a dream, Moon Knight really believes that this is happening to him. Like, he's trying to tell himself that it's just a dream, but, like, it feels real, so he feels the pain. And then one of the other servants comes up to this big, strong guy and is like, hey, put Moon Knight down. And then she, like, looks over Moon Knight and is like, hey, you're all right, Babala? Did he hurt you? And it turns out that she's also insane, like, she's evil. And she transforms into this weird, fleshy tunnel. Moon Knight finds himself falling down this tunnel of flesh. I'm not joking. This is the best way to explain it, is he starts falling into this abyss of flesh. And he pulls out a can of tear gas and he sets it off, which causes all of them to be knocked out. So he's finally out of their dream worlds that they've been creating. And he asks Detective Flint what happened to Morpheus, and Flint tells him that Morpheus has taken Marlene up into the roof. So he begins using, like, his powers on Marlene. He begins floating her up into the sky, and Moon Knight arrives. He grabs a couple of weapons of his covered in like sleep serum, and he throws them at Morpheus, because the trick to beating Morpheus is to make him go to sleep and stop him from dreaming. So this serum will put him to sleep and also make him incapable of dreaming, because as soon as he starts dreaming, he becomes Morpheus. So Morpheus gets hit with the weapons, and he attacks Moon Knight with all of his dark energy, sending Moon Knight flying off the top of the building. But Moon Knight manages to grab onto the edge, stopping himself from falling. Morpheus goes to kill Moon Knight, but then gets knocked out as the serum finally kicks in. And so he quickly runs over to Marlene, and he unties her, and they unite, and they decide to go and have dinner together to kind of, recollect on what just happened. And Marlene admits to Mark that she has to tell him something. And Mark's like, oh, you don't have to tell me. Like, you can come back whenever you want. Like, he assumes that she wants to come back to the mansion. And she's like, no, I'm actually telling you that I'm gonna go back to my ex-husband. My ex-husband, Eric. And Mark's just like, what the hell? That sucks. Why are you doing that? And that's where it ends. It ends on that bombshell. Marlene is going to go back to her ex-husband, Eric. She's basically just given Mark the finger. He's just like, I'm going to go back to my ex-husband for no reason, really. And yeah, that's where it ends. All right, so issue 4 is pretty crazy. It's really weird. Immediately, we begin with this character who is known as Bluebeard. And the best way to explain Bluebeard is not only is he designed to look like a pirate, but he's also a misogynist. That is his whole villain persona, is that he is incredibly misogynistic towards women. What he does is he kidnaps women, and he has a key, and it can shoot neuron rays, and he uses it on these women in order to get them to do whatever he wants. And so what he's doing is he's capturing women and tying them up, and he wants at least 5 women, and then he's going to kill them all for being women, because he sees that, like, he believes that they are ruining man's world. Like, basically, he is the Andrew Tate of the supervillain community. Yeah, it's really weird. So yeah, he captures his 4th woman, uses his neuron rays on her, shackles her up, and then we're introduced to another character whose name is Andrew Peril. He's a journalist who is investigating Bluebeard because apparently Bluebeard is communicating with him, and so Peril is able to write up journalist stories. Peril has a bit of a rivalry with another character named Miss Brick, who also works at the same office that in journalism that Peril works at. So they have a bit of a rivalry. She's a little bit jealous that he's getting so many great stories from this Bluebeard guy, sorry. Sometimes they, like, sometimes his name is miswritten in this. It's spelt wrong. Sometimes they spell it as Bluebird, sometimes they spell it as Bluebeard. So Moon Knight shows up where Detective Flint is, because he's like, oh, you called me. What did you call me about? And Flint is like, we want you to investigate this Bluebeard guy who is capturing women. And Moon Knight is like, I'm not your errand boy. You know, the reason why I helped with Morpheus last time is because it was personal. There are plenty of other vigilantes and superheroes in the city. Hire one of them instead. I've got other things that I need to do. Because Moon Knight's kind of like, you know, it's one thing to have the priests constantly be telling me what to do. I don't want to have Detective Flint telling me what to do as well. You know, especially because I've got personal stuff going on with Marlene that I need to sort out because Mark, instead of moving on from Marlene, is choosing not to and is still hung up on her, believing that her going back to her ex-husband is her testing him. Yeah, definitely some, like, incel vibes coming from Mark, where he's just like, oh, she's just testing me by going back to her ex-husband. She's not really going back to her ex-husband. You know, it's a trick. So Mark starts training at home as he thinks to himself about Marlene, and that's when a friend who I've never seen before in Moon Knight, who is apparently a good friend of Mark's, as far as I know, this is his first appearance. His name is Kodiak. He comes in with a dog that I've never seen before, and apparently Mark knows this dog really well. It's just really weird when you're writing a series about a character and you just introduce characters that they are supposed to know. Like, apparently Mark is really good friends with Miss Brick, but we've never met her before. So we're just introducing all these characters that Mark is supposed to know really well, but the reader doesn't at all. So it's really hard to sell their relationship, because it's like, I don't know who you are. You know, I had the exact same feeling when I was reading early issues of The Flash and they introduced Daphne Dean and she was supposed to be Barry's, you know, childhood friend, but, like, she's a brand new character, so it's like, I don't care, you know, like, make me care about this. So he tells Mark about Miss Brick and Peril writing stories about Bluebeard. Meanwhile, Miss Brick gets visited by Bluebeard and kidnapped by him. And that's when Mark receives a message from the priests telling him that Miss Brick has been kidnapped. And because Mark knows Miss Brick, he is now willing to help Detective Flint because it's suddenly become personal. So he heads back to Detective Flint, and Flint's like, oh, did you change your mind? Like, did your conscience get on you? And Moon Knight's just like, shut up, just tell me about this Bluebeard guy. And so Detective Flint tells Moon Knight everything that he knows about how, like, he's kidnapping women and stuff. So Moon Knight just goes and finds, like, a random gang that's playing poker and interrupts their poker game and starts, like, shouting at them. And the guys are like, oh, we don't know anything about Bluebeard. And Moon Knight just keeps shouting at them and threatening them. It turns out they really don't know anything about Bluebeard, so Moon Knight attacked them for no reason. So instead, he does learn one thing from these guys, and that's that Peril is writing stories on Bluebeard, and Moon Knight could have learnt that any other way. He didn't have to attack these guys just to learn that Peril was writing stories about Bluebeard. But he heads to Peril's apartment where Peril isn't there. And he sees on Peril's wall that there is a photo of Bluebeard's castle, and by looking at it, Moon Knight recognizes the castle as being one at a old amusement park. So we go to the amusement park where Bluebeard is about to kill Miss Brick and the other four women with a hatchet. He goes to attack her, but the hatchet gets knocked out of his hand because Moon Knight has arrived. He's like, let the women go. And he's like, oh, you white knight in shining armor, like, trying to save these women, even though they deserve to die just for being women. Like, I guess I'll have to kill you too. And Bluebeard goes to use his neuron rays on Moon Knight, but Moon Knight knocks them out of his hands. And then he fights Bluebeard and ends up knocking him over by punching him in the face. And that's when Bluebeard's beard and glasses and hair fall off, and it's revealed that Bluebeard is Andrew Peril. Like, we didn't see that coming from a mile away. It was him the whole time. You know, he was making up these Bluebeard stories because he was originally fired by Miss Brick for trying to push, like, neuron research, which is why he, you know, was able to use neuron rays as Bluebeard, because that was what he was originally reporting about. So he created this Bluebeard character to bring his career back, which he succeeded in doing. But obviously he's a psychopath and he was actually going to kill women. So it's a good thing that Moon Knight was able to stop him. Yeah, this plot twist saw it coming from a mile away. So Moon Knight beats Bluebeard, saves Miss Brick, and they go their separate ways. And Mark decides to go and visit Marlene because he still has it in his head that she is testing him, and she is expecting him to come up to her door and basically tell her that he loves her. And so he does that. He goes up to her door. He knocks on the door. She answers it. She's like, "Mark, what are you doing here?" And then Mark hears a voice. He's like, "Who is it, Marlene?" And this part's insane because Marlene's husband, ex-husband Eric, comes out to see Mark. And what is it revealed about Eric that makes Mark feel like a total dirtbag? Eric is in a wheelchair. Yes, that's right. Eric is disabled. So not only is Mark Spector trying to steal this guy's wife, but also this guy is already, you know, having a hard time. And it's like, wow, like, this sucks. Like, I feel bad for Eric, you know? I feel bad for the fact that, like, Mark is just trying to steal his wife, you know? Yeah. This is insane. Like, when this happened, when Eric showed up and he was in a wheelchair, I was like, oh my god. Like, Mark is a piece of shit. Because not only is he trying to steal somebody's wife, but, like, you know, there isn't really a lot that Eric would be able to do about it, because it's not like he'd be able to fight Mark. Like, Eric is at a disadvantage, which is really unfortunate. And so hopefully Mark takes the higher road and decides to just leave them alone, because, you know, otherwise, like, he's really skimming that line of, like, is Mark ableist? You know, I guess we'll find out in the next issue. All right, so 5 issues in of a 6-issue series, and we're already switching up writers. This one is now written by Joe Duffy, same artist as previously. This one is another one that's kind of, I don't know, the more issues I read of this volume of Moon Knight, the less I like it. Like, I don't think it's very good. So it begins with a young girl who is upset because she's not going to be able to meet her friends at a concert that she really wants to go to. And she says it's the worst thing that's ever happened in her life. And then she gets kidnapped by a guy while she's walking, like, past an alleyway. And it's like, until now. Like, missing the concert was the worst thing until she got kidnapped by this dude. Like, when I saw this, I was like, oh my god, like, what the hell? Like, that's crazy. It's especially crazy to, like, compare being kidnapped to just missing a concert. But I guess it is in character for, like, a young girl to think that missing a concert is the worst thing that would ever happen in her life, you know? So we meet this man named Singh who lives in India. And his goal is to rid the world of a group known as White Cobra, who are the ones responsible for kidnapping children. Basically, what they do is they kidnap children and they sacrifice them so that they can gain immortality. The White Cobra is led by 2 brothers who are known as the Morgan Brothers. And yeah, Singh's goal is to kill them and save these children. So he sends his assassins to the Morgan Brothers in order to eliminate them. Meanwhile, So I'm rooting for Singh. Meanwhile, Mark is at his museum, and Frenchie is there. Frenchie finally shows up again since I think the first issue, and he talks about Marlene, and Mark is like, "Don't talk about Marlene anymore. We broke up." There's no continuation of the cliffhanger that we left on in the last issue. Like, it's just, we've blown past it already. I feel like they switched writers because the last issue was just so weird that they were like, all right, let's get somebody else and see if they can do a better job. But right after mentioning Marlene and how he's broken up with her, Mark meets a different woman who decides to take him off and get to know him. But before he can get to know her, his ankh starts, shining, meaning that evil is coming. And the three priests talk to Mark and show him visions of the Morgan brothers and Singh's assassin and the children. And the weird thing about Mark is that he is, in my opinion, Mark is way too on the fence with this. Like, he treats Singh's assassins as if they're just as evil as like Morgan's, or like as if they're just as in the wrong as Morgan's men. Like, he's trying to be like neutral about it. And I feel like this is one of those situations where like Moon Knight shouldn't be neutral. Like, he doesn't have to be okay with Singh's assassins killing the Morgans, but he shouldn't be mad about them killing the Morgans either, because the Morgans are killing children in order to gain immortality. So it should be one of those situations where like Moon Knight should be like, like what, like, oh, you killed them, oh, that sucks, but well, they kind of deserved it anyway, so I don't care that much. Like, you would think it would be one of those situations with Moon Knight where he's like, I'd rather you didn't kill them, but I'm not going to complain that you did, because they deserved it. But he's not like that. He's like, no, don't kill them. Like, that's like, that makes you just as bad as they are, So the three assassins show up at the Morgan building where they attack one of the Morgan brothers. They slit the throats of his guards and they kill Morgan. They get him on his knees and they shoot him in the head. It's pretty satisfying. They just shoot this child killer straight in the head. One of the assassins manages to escape. The other assassin kills themselves to make it look like less of a one-sided thing, because I guess Singh doesn't want people knowing that he's the one instigating it. So, you got to leave a couple of dead assassins behind to give that message that it's like, maybe the Morgans started the fight, So one of the assassins managed to get away, and this is when it's revealed that the assassins, because up until this point you just assume the assassins are men, but it's actually revealed that the assassins are women. I don't know why they were women. There's a weird thing with women in this Moon Knight run in general. The reveal of them being women doesn't really matter at all. Well, it matters in one way, and that is that they wear saris. So it's the only way for Moon Knight to be able to track the assassins is because one of the assassins that got away was wearing a sari, and so the way that Moon Knight tracks her down is he looks at every single hotel where a woman wearing a sari has gone in and booked a room. First of all, how can Moon Knight even decide whether or not the person really was wearing a sari? Also, I would imagine that there's probably a lot more people wearing saris than you would think. So it must have taken Moon Knight a damn long time just to track one person specifically across every hotel in New York where people might be wearing saris. It just feels like a very outlandish. The plot is just very outlandish, I think. So yeah, this woman enters her apartment where she finds that Moon Knight has broken into her apartment, which immediately, if she wanted to, she could just call the police and be like, this guy broke into my apartment. Like, being a vigilante doesn't permit you to break into people's places just because you have a hunch that they might be an assassin. You don't necessarily have the evidence. So Moon Knight tries to convince this woman to turn away from killing the Morgans. He also draws a gun on her. Like, he doesn't shoot her, but he pulls a gun out, the gun that was used to kill the Morgans, and he's pointing the gun at her, which is just more evidence for her to bring to the court if she were to decide to, you know, try to sue Moon Knight or get him in trouble. Be like, he drew a gun on me. And, like, there's probably footage of Moon Knight drawing a gun on her. It's like, man, for a vigilante who is supposed to have been doing this for quite some time, you would think that he would be smart enough to not draw weapons on people that are at the moment just suspects and not actually convicted criminals. You know, like, think a little smarter, Moon Knight. Gotta cover all your tracks. So she refuses to give up killing the Morgans, and so Moon Knight decides that he has to fight her. And luckily, he doesn't attack her first. Otherwise, that would be another thing that she would be able to bring over to the police, is that Moon Knight assaulted her as well. No, she assaults him first. She grabs a lamp and then she hits him over the head, knocks him down, and runs away. And Moon Knight is like, all right, I got to chase after her and stop her from killing the Morgan. He enters Morgan Tower, where he finds a bunch of people slaughtered that were all working for Morgan. I don't think any of these men were innocent. Pretty sure all of these men were the ones responsible for kidnapping the children, so they all deserved this, I would think. And then we find Morgan, you know, with 4 children on a mat, preparing to sacrifice them. And as he's about to sacrifice them, a gun is pointed at his head. And, this woman is going to shoot him. We never actually learn her name, but she's going to shoot him. But Moon Knight stops her from killing him. And so, by knocking the gun out of her hand. And so Morgan goes for the gun. Meanwhile, Morgan is going for the gun, but Moon Knight is more focused on attacking the woman, like attacking the assassin that was just trying to kill the child killer. So we can already see where Moon Knight's priorities lie. Like, you'd think that he would see Morgan going... Like, there is a shot where Moon Knight is running towards this woman, and right next to her is Morgan reaching for the gun. So there's no way that Moon Knight didn't see him reaching for the gun. So you would think that he would prioritize that guy and not, another vigilante. So Morgan shoots the gun at Moon Knight. He ducks quick enough that it just blasts through his cape, and then he kicks Morgan in the face, sending him flying backwards. She goes to pick up the gun, and Moon Knight just crushes it under his foot and is like, he deserves to die, but he deserves to die slowly and painfully in prison. And it's like, not necessarily. Like, he also deserves to just be executed outright, But Moon Knight would rather he just get locked up for the rest of his life. But also, he's immortal, so I don't even know what Moon Knight was talking about, where he's like, oh, he deserves to die a slow and painful death. And it's like, but if this guy's immortal, we don't know how long it's going to be before he dies, So the authorities come to get Morgan, and it's 12 o'clock at midnight, and Morgan hasn't made the sacrifice, so he withers into a skeleton. Like, he just falls apart and withers into dust. And so, yeah, this whole thing was just pointless, where Moon Knight was like, oh, he deserves to live, he deserves to die a painful death, and in the end, Morgan died the least painful death possible, at least according to her. Morgan dying was very peaceful. It was as if he died naturally, like him turning into dust wasn't painful at all. And she's so guilt-ridden over Morgan not getting what he deserved that she shoots herself in the gut with the gun. And Moon Knight's just like, lady, don't! And then he picks up her body and is like, oh, lady, what good did that do? Which master did your death serve? And it's just such a weird thing for him to say, where he's just like, oh, lady. Like, what good did that do? Like, what? Killing yourself didn't do anything. Like, how did that help anybody? And it's like, just weird. Like, this whole issue, this whole story
was weird, and that's exactly where it ends. It just ends with Moon Knight holding her dead body, being like, "Why'd you do that?" Yeah. So now we're gonna move on to issue 6, which is the final issue, and let's hope that this ends on a high. But if it's written by the same guys, I highly doubt that. Especially because like issue 1 wasn't that bad, but then after that it was kind of just like mediocre to just what the hell is going on.
All right. The final issue of Moon Knight Volume 2. This one is written by Christopher Priest, art by Mark Beecham. Again, shifting writers again. And immediately reading this one, you can just know that like they classified this as a miniseries, but just because it's short or unfinished, that doesn't make it a miniseries. Like a miniseries is normally a comic book series that is either one long story for like 6 issues, 8 issues with a definitive ending, or a like 8 issue series where each issue has like its own plot, but there is one like plot thread going through that has a definitive ending at the very end. This doesn't have that. It doesn't have either. It's just 6 random issues of stories that just suddenly end with this issue. So it's not a mini series. It's a series that was clearly supposed to be ongoing and didn't end up going anywhere and got cancelled because it just wasn't very good. And you can tell going into this that Christopher Priest doesn't care. Like, he knows he's filling in and he's just writing whatever the issue is going to be. It's just the final issue. I don't even think he was told that this was supposed to be the final issue and that he needed to give the series a definitive ending, because this issue does not do that at all. Basically, there's this character named Mother White, who is a Jamaican woman, and basically she sells drugs to, well, they refer to them as ghetto kids, like ghetto people within the community. She sells drugs to them, uses them to meet her own ends. In actuality, she is a cannibal who is trying to get a sacrifice for, but as far as I can tell, no real reason. I guess to continue having whatever power she has, because she isn't immortal. She's just a cannibal and who just wants to sacrifice people for no real reason, even though like her main goal is to just sell drugs. So I don't know why she's out sacrificing people. Like, Christopher Priest doesn't really bother to explain anything because this is just a 1 issue story. This character's probably never going to show up again. But yeah, she's dealing drugs to a bunch of kids and like a bunch of young guys, and Moon Knight breaks in and kidnaps doesn't kidnap a child. The child has been kidnapped by Mother White, presumably to be her sacrifice. And so Moon Knight saves the child and runs away with it. And as he does, this woman named Lenora, who used to be a cop, enters, and she deals with Mother White, and she decides to help Mother White try and get Moon Knight, because now Mother White wants Moon Knight to be her next sacrifice because of how powerful he is. So Moon Knight drops the son off at his parents' house, who have been worried sick about him, and then he calls Frenchie, and Frenchie basically tells Mark to go looking for a Mercedes because apparently somebody who has visited Mother White was driving in a Mercedes. So if he goes looking for a Mercedes, he'll find someone related to Mother White. And so Moon Knight heads to a place where a Mercedes is parked out the front, and it turns out to be the house of Lenora. And this is when it's revealed that Lenora is a drug addict, and that's why she's working with Mother White, where she, is addicted to drugs. She works with Mother White so that Mother White can give her drugs. And so Moon Knight shows up and is like,
why are you doing that? Like, why are you doing drugs? Especially because you used to be a cop, right? So, like, instead of helping Mother White, like, why don't you help me? And then maybe you'll find the strength to give up your addiction. Lenora tries to sleep with Mark. She just offers it to him, and Mark is just like, no, thank you. I don't really want to sleep with you. You know, I'm not somebody who just wants to sleep with every single person I come across, especially drug addicts. I think that's the real reason Mark decides not to sleep with her, because he's like, you're a drug addict. I don't want to sleep with a drug addict. So Lenora goes to Mother White, and she agrees to lure Moon Knight out so that he can get killed by a bunch of Mother White's men, like ganged up on. Mark meets Lenora, and he'd actually tailed her, so he saw her go and visit Mother White, so he knows that this is a trap, because he just shows up as Mark. And then Mother White's guys show up and try to beat the crap out of Mark, but Mark just beats the crap out of them instead, which is really dumb because now Mother White knows who Moon Knight is because she has like facial recognition of him because they've actually seen Mark, you know? So I don't know why. I don't know. Like, because when he starts fighting the guys, from one panel, so in one panel, he's not wearing his mask and he's wearing a coat. And then in the next panel, he's suddenly got like his Moon Knight hood on and he's like thrown his coat off. So it's presumed that like, oh, he quickly got dressed into his costume. But we don't know how much time has passed in between both panels. It seems like the guys have just immediately shown up. So you think that they would have seen Mark putting his mask on. But yeah, he beats up these guys and but then they manage to overpower him. Like Moon Knight has the upper hand at first, but they take him out because it's not nighttime, so he's not at the peak of his strength. They take him to Mother White. Meanwhile, Lenora is feeling bad for betraying Mark, so she starts just throwing everything around, throwing all her furniture around, and she decides to go and help Mark. Mark meets Mother White face to face, and she reveals to Mark that she's going to sacrifice him because she feels like it. I still don't know why she sacrifices people. They don't say. But, you know, Moon Knight is all chained up and he's trying to break out of his chains, and he manages to do so. He's so strong that he breaks the chains. But Lenora shows up, and Mother White takes her hostage and tries to kill Lenora. But what Moon Knight does is he throws one of his weapons at a nearby torch, extinguishing it and causing the room to turn pitch black. And then using the darkness, Moon Knight picks off all of Mother White's like men. And then so Mother White and Lenora are like, let's get the hell out of here. And as they try to get to the exit, Moon Knight gets in their way, and he says, like, at this point in time, Moon Knight is saying really stupid stuff. Like, if you've ever seen those memes of, like those fake memes of, like, Moon Knight, or I wouldn't say they're fake memes, but the memes of Moon Knight saying things that he hasn't actually said that's all, like, memey and cartoonish. He says something very similar to that. I feel like somebody read this miniseries and assumed that Moon Knight's always like that, because he says, "Give up, Mother White, the Fist of Khonshu comes for you. What think? Am I spooky or what?" Like, that's literally how it's written. Like, there's straight up, you can tell Priest just doesn't care because, like, there are so many typos in this where he's just like, what think? Am I spooky or what? It's just like, what the hell is going on? Like, how is there such bad spelling in this when none of the editors, like, Denny O'Neil was one of the editors for this, and he's supposed to be a good editor. This is the same man who was the editor for Batman, who had a Batman Bible with everything, like with all of Batman's continuity in it to make sure that everything remains as cohesive as possible. And yet, what think gets by, you know, Denny. So Mother White tries to attack Moon Knight, but he just vaults over her and she falls straight through the floor because haha, she's fat. And she starts shooting her weapon underground, and because she's where all the gas mains are, she causes a massive explosion, but Moon Knight and Lenora manage to get out just in time. And so Mark decides to head home, and he sees on the news what's going on with Mother White, and the fact that like no body was found, so maybe she survived. And so he's like, damn it, that sucks if she survived. And meanwhile, Lenora heads home, and she's finally given up drugs. But unfortunately, one of Mother White's men shows up in her apartment and kills her. He's just like, this is for Mother White. And he just shoots her down and kills her. And then Moon Knight shows up behind him, and he's like, huh? Moon Knight, stay away from me. Back off. And then he just runs at the nearby window and jumps and plummets. Like, he just runs through the window and plummets to his death. And yeah, Lenora is dead. So everything that happened didn't really matter because no one was even saved except for that one kid. The only person that was saved in this whole story was that one kid that Moon Knight saved at the beginning, but he wasn't even able to save Lenora. She finally gave up drugs and got killed anyway. And that's it. That's the end of the story. That's the end of Moon Knight Volume 2. Just kind of ending on a big wet fart. Yeah, this started off promising. Like, my biggest problem is when I started off reading this, I was like, issue 1, not that bad. You know, we're doing a couple of retcons that I'm not really a fan of, like, you know, Mark just being Mark Spector and not having Stephen Grant or Jake Lockley as his alternate identities. The stuff with Marlene was just completely pointless and didn't go anywhere, you know, where we established that she's got back with her ex-husband. Her ex-husband being disabled doesn't add anything except, I guess, make Mark look like a dickhead. Because, yeah, that just gets completely ignored. And then we end on this issue, which is just an issue of Moon Knight that serves no purpose. Like, it's not even, like, a very good story. I didn't enjoy this issue at all. You can probably tell because of the energy. Like, often I'm trying to keep as energized as possible when talking about comics, but it's really hard to do that when you read one that just kind of sucks. And that's what the second half of this was. You know, we started with Bluebeard, and at least that one was kind of crazy, so I kind of had fun reading it because I was like, oh, Bluebeard? Like, what the hell? And he's a misogynist? Like, what? That's weird. And then we end on Mother White. Like, no reason, like, no surprise at all that this got cancelled in 6 issues. But besides the, you know, the bad stories, I still hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. Again, sorry about, you know, the fact that this was supposed to be Identity Crisis, and that's been set back, unfortunately. Hopefully, I'll be able to get the Identity Crisis episode out in a couple of weeks once my phone comes back in fully repaired. Until then, I'm just going to have to figure out what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do the next volume of Moon Knight because it's a big commitment. There's like 60 issues of that. I don't know. Like, maybe I'll do something a bit shorter. I'll have to think it out. I don't think I've settled on anything for next week, so it's gonna be probably a surprise, just like this week. I'll just release a video that'll be about something, and we'll have to see. Maybe another Marvel thing. I'm thinking another Marvel thing, you know, until I get back to Identity Crisis. Might be fun doing a couple of Marvel miniseries, like maybe there's some like Iron Man miniseries, or some more obscure characters, like maybe Iron Fist or Power Man, if there's any like miniseries that they had. Yeah, who knows? You'll have to tune in next week and see what happens. Have a good one.